And with that, we are live with the Astro Weather for the 12th of July, 2023. And we have just, we've experienced the Mars shift into Virgo, and there is more to come, much more to come, as we are also on the precipice of the pole shift with the nodes. And everything seems to be getting activated, as they say. So why don't we jump right in here, and let me just make sure I have my coordinates all set and correct, and let's get into the Astro Weather. By the way, I hope everybody's having a good start to their day, and if you're in another part of the realm, I certainly hope that it has been, at the very least, growth filled, if not rewarding. So here we go. Let's focus down here, because this is where the action is. We have Mars just right into Virgo. And I was thinking about Mars and Virgo yesterday. And it's really interesting how, and I may talk about some of this on the 15-minute side of things, how critical we've all become of people that are truth tellers or revelators, people that are in some ways guardians of what we would consider to be average values, really just basic values, but now seem like really sacred principles. And a lot of it came out of like a firestorm of tweets yesterday about the movie The Sound of Freedom, and Tim Ballard and Jim Caviezel and Mel Gibson and Carlos Slim. And it was a really interesting reaction to the movie. And there are people that are feeling like, well, it's all a con job, and it's really kind of a release valve, and it's basically obfuscating the real issues, right? And the real issues are that there is a ton of child abuse and even what we'd call interfamily trafficking here in the United States, right? So you have those critics. Then there's, what's gone on with Tim Ballard and his background and working for the Clintons, and seems pretty clear that Tim Ballard has literally Masonic ties. I mean, there's a picture of him on Twitter wearing a tie that had the compass and the square, little versions of the compass and the square in his tie. So it's like, okay, well, now we're going to go after the Sound of Freedom. And I understand it, right? I mean, I understand that people are trying to stay clear and clean of any kind of manipulation because of how much illusion that we're being sort of truth washed in a lot of ways, if that's there is such a thing. And to me, it was really Mars and Virgo. It was really aggressive energy. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't look at the ties, or you shouldn't literally the ties. You shouldn't look behind the screen, because in a lot of ways, that's kind of how we got here. And at the same time, we live in a really imperfect world, a very imperfect world. And the people who are art makers, storytellers, myth makers, they're all flawed. They're all flawed. I mean, Mel Gibson is flawed, but it doesn't take away from the fact that he made, I think, one of my favorite movies, and what I consider maybe to be one of the top 50 movies of all time, in Apocalypto, right? And and whatever you think of him and his relationship with his Catholicism, he made The Passion of the Christ, which is a very unpopular film to make. So we're dealing in a very imperfect realm, and so Mars and Virgo is more than willing to aggressively address those imperfections. I think we talked a little bit about that yesterday. And even with Pallas here, like we're looking at the pattern, and there's nothing wrong with it, right? Like even, because it was really at the height with the Yod and Pluto and Neptune, and really yesterday when Mars was in that kind of Yod position with Neptune, it was clear that Yod was being worked out on the sound of freedom, and then you even have people like Owen Benjamin chiming in and trying to, ask questions about why Jim Caviezel has 3 adopted Chinese kids. I mean, I asked that question on Sunday night. To me, it's quite strange. And it's like, well, what do you do with the discernment? Because that's really what we're talking about here. Because to me, there are really 2 signs that are going to be very engaged in discernment. One is Scorpio and the other is Virgo, because Virgo will separate the wheat from the chaff. I mean, that's what Virgo literally does, right? It's connected to the sign of the harvest. And so you're harvesting things like wheat and all these other, goodies. And of course, with wheat, there is that part where you discern like the kernel or the chaff from the kernel, right? So that's what Virgo does. And Scorpio, which is very much related to Virgo, is engaged in looking beneath things. So yesterday, there was a high degree of what I would call aggressive criticism, which again, I'm not saying like, don't go there. I mean, I feel like in some ways we've been trauma triggered to go there. We've been trauma triggered to find out, oh, just a gatekeeper. Oh, just a talking head. Oh, just another industry plant. And to be honest with you, there's been more than ample evidence to prove that to be true, right? But what happens is that if you keep going deep enough and you keep moving into this place, and this is just on a kind of a collective level, then nobody is clean. Nobody's clean. And then what are you dealing with? You're dealing with a bunch of really imperfect people. And then theoretically, everything they've ever done is a lie. And if everything they've ever done is a lie, then everything that's around us is a lie. And that everything moving forward would theoretically follow the same pattern, right? And that would be a lie. So then why would you even want to stick around at that point? Maybe you just want to like put your head in an oven. This is what I said on Twitter, or wait for the being who is completely perfect and therefore unassailable. But even then, if you look at the theoretical life of Christ, a perfect being, that even then his life was not unassailable. Even then, his so-called critics of the day were able to find find imperfections, right? To find imperfections and to accuse him of being a false Messiah, right? Which is really what a lot of the story was about. Not all of it, but again, that's a big part of it. So even if you're waiting around for the perfect being, I'm not even sure that the perfect being would show up and people would recognize that perfect being. So how does this all relate to you today on an individual level? Well, I think the potential for absolutely ruthless self-criticism is in the air, because we're at a point now, we're at a really important point, I think, both personally and culturally. So Victor Davis Hanson, who is a somewhat interesting character, he teaches at Stanford. He's part of the Hoover Institute. He's kind of the he's kind of the latter day replacement of Anthony Sutton at Hoover, and he just published a piece called the coup that never was, or something like that. It's so really what he's doing is he's asking very pertinent questions, which we've asked here. many times, and even not on this show, but on 15 Minutes, and talked about the fact that we have undergone a coup in this country, and that the standard operating procedure is very, very different than anything we've ever seen before. So we're coming now, if you look around, we're coming to terms with that, right? We're looking at the coming to terms of and really we're just kind of getting there. You know, somebody sent me a video, Woo's News, and it was breaking down everything that was going on in DC in and around January 6th. And you know, it's just all they're all spooks on both sides. They're all spooks, right? It was like they were creating a Hollywood type environment to stage, for all intents and purposes, a theatrical coup. And the theatrical coup could go either way, right? It could either go the right way or the left way. And so we've seen how that's been played out. So, you know, Mars and Virgo here is just merciless when it comes to addressing this idea of perfection and imperfection. And I think that, again, kind of looking at it from that level, you know, we have to figure out, okay, well, what do we do if we pull back, you know, all the curtains? And of course, what do we see? We see the little tiny man who's supposed to be the great and powerful Oz. You know, does that liberate us? Does that take us deeper into the realm of trauma? You know, that's just on a collectible, because then it trickles down personally, and there's no really difference between the two, because when you understand that, then you begin to look at your own life, and then you begin to ask yourself, well, you know, how did I get here? You know, and am I complicit in all of this? I mean, that's really a big question. Like, are you know, how complicit are all of us, when it comes to propping up the illusion? And that's where we get into Venus and Neptune in conjunct, right? So Venus and Leo getting ready to hit that retrograde switch. And so it's about our relationship with the illusion, or our relationship with the illusions in our lives. And this is a really, really critical time, because Mars is almost fascistic here at these degrees of Virgo, and especially joining up with Pallas. You know, like, we got to have change. We got to have change. We got to have change. Nobody's good enough. Nobody's clean enough. All the messengers are tainted. And you know what? There can be some value in that, but then what do you do with it, right? And so then again, it comes right back to Venus. Like, how complicit are we? And so you have to be able to make some degree of peace with that. You can say, well, it wasn't my fault. It was the boomers' fault. It's their fault. And if you go back far, well, it's not their fault. It's those people from the fucking silent generation. It's their fault because they didn't speak up. And then you go back even further and say, oh, it's those people from the lost generation, because all they wanted to do was just party and have fun and, you know, pretend like the Roaring Twenties was the Enlightenment, right? You can keep going further and further back and laying the tracks of blame for how we got here culturally. None of that is going to help us, although it can be somewhat enlightening to see how we got here. So now the question is, how do we get out, right? How do we get out of this thing that's around us, where again we're being given imperfect messages from imperfect messengers? And how do you discern that? And how do you take the things from that are reasonable and usable? Today, I'm going to give you kind of a heads up at the start of the day. His art is incredible. His politics are fucking ridiculous, right? This is really a Mars and Virgo kind of dynamic, and to some degree even a dilemma. You know, when we look at Venus, and again, they're still yoked. Just because Mars is in Virgo doesn't mean that we don't have a conjunction. Like, there's still a conjunction. And with Venus in Leo, there's also a tremendous sense of pride involved, right? It's sort of like, okay, Mars is the machete, clearing out the weeds and the vines and the jungle, because that's really what it's doing. And then Venus is sort of hanging out behind here, and realizing that this thing is dense, it's overgrown, and it's almost it's almost unnavigable in some ways. And so now we look at the relationship that we have with so-called reality, and I feel like today there's a high shock value. There's a high shock value involved. Shock value around this overall relationship with reality, and also people, right? People, gatekeepers. And the other thing too with Venus and Leo, this brings us right into the movie The Sound of Freedom, because we're dealing with children. Venus and Leo is all about relationships with children. And I don't think that the controversy around the film, from the inner circle of the so-called truther community, or even outside of the truther community, where you're dealing with mainstream media who are also taking pot shots at the film. So I don't want to get all wound up in the film, but it seems to be one of those things where it's matching our internal kind of evolutionary path, and also an external evolutionary touch point, right? So it's a nexus. The film is a nexus point. And, at the end of the day, whether it's The Sound of Freedom or Alex Jones or anything else, right? You alone get to figure out how you derive value from people or expositions of truth or art that have some degree of meaning. Led Zeppelin was satanic as fuck. Does it negate the fact that they made really great music? Could they have made the music without their little side deals going on? Question mark, right? So it's a much bigger dialogue. And then if you want to divest yourself of everything, which is very Mars and Virgo, by the way, and I would not be surprised during this time where people will just renounce their ways, renounce the ways of the world and their ways with the world. You're really into like Amish country. And what's fascinating is watching like news clips and sort of the Amish begin to pop up in the Twitter feed, which they have been, by the way, and how they have not suffered high degrees of autism, high degrees of anything related with the needle in the arm, right? Like, oh, well, isn't that interesting? And then they've rejected modernity. And so when we have Mars and Virgo here, we're really looking at our relationship with the things that get in the way, with the purity of expression, the essence of spirit, which is over here on the other side with Saturn. And we're going to be cranking up with this Mars-Saturn opposition over the next 10 to 12 days. And that dynamic is only going to get stronger. It is not going to dissipate. We're really headed, I think, collective, well, I'll use the word collective, which I don't always like to use, towards a spiritual crisis. Because with Saturn retrograde in Pisces, whether it's the church or the government, we're witnessing the failure of institutions. Saturn's institutional. I don't care what sign it's in. It's institutional. And in Pisces, it's the faith that we tie to those institutions. And we'll see this on the right. We'll see this on the left. We'll see it. Again, astrology is agnostic. And if you're on the left, you'll see, like, my God, I've been willing to sign off on this thing for a long period of time, only because I don't want that other guy in there. I don't want those other people over there who represent that other guy. There's, I would say, a better than average chance that even these people will begin to reassess and reevaluate their relationship with turning a blind eye and essentially enabling a system just because it's not the other guy, right? And then we'll have the same thing on the other side with this Mars, and it's going to be interesting to see how people deal with this. We're really headed into this weird, spiritual crisis. Like, again, we've had Mars Saturn oppositions, but in Virgo and Pisces, we're dealing with the spirit and the flesh. That this is completely how these two signs operate, right? Pisces is the spirit and Virgo is the flesh. And then again, there's the trickle down to your own life and kind of how you stack up. Whether you're doing it or not, there's a trickle down effect. And if you are engaged in this so-called pursuit of the truth, you would be relentless in it. You would say, okay, well, how much of a role have I played? And then that's where it gets really sticky, really, really sticky. And you may say, I'm pretty clean. And then what do you do? Right now, you wake up in an imperfect world. Clearly, it's an incredibly imperfect world, and it's more imperfect than it ever was, in my estimation. And I've been here going on 6 decades, and I've seen a lot. And what I'm seeing now is really the garden of evil, not even good and evil. Like, it is really the garden of evil. And so here we have Mars and Virgo, and it's crusading energy. Mars and Virgo is the Crusades. Like, we're gonna clear out the place, and we're gonna reclaim Jerusalem from those filthy Saracens. That energy's in the air, and you have to be really cautious, really, really cautious. It's easy to get very zealous would be the word. I would say if you're going to use that energy, which is really what I've been doing, like I've gone back to the gym. I've hit 2 days in a row. So I'm actually, trying to establish the 30-day cycle. So it becomes part of, you got to work some of this out. Literally, you have to work it out. And I would also say if you're in some kind of like fasting mode, or you're in an extreme sort of dietary place, be very cautious. Very cautious. This would not be a time where I would recommend things like dry fasting. I wouldn't recommend a dry fast with Mars and Virgo, especially with the oppositional energy with Saturn and Pisces. So if you're going to go through some kind of extreme cleanse, again, I would just use caution, right? Use caution, because what happens is that people say, well, I gotta purify. I've got to rid myself of them. If we can't get rid of the parasites in the world, then I'll get rid of the parasites inside of me. Well, I get it, right? And the challenge with that is that once you get rid of parasites, there's a very good chance parasites are going to come back. And then you have to be just absolutely vigilant, right, from that point forward. And I think ultimately leads to becoming a breatharian or something. It's very interesting energy, and it's not easy. It's really not easy. And then we talked about this yesterday with Mercury in Leo, and everybody's got a fucking opinion, and everybody's opinion is the most important opinion in the room. When I'm watching this on Twitter yesterday, I'm like, my God, everybody's got the final word. And to some extent, they may have some really interesting insights, but Mercury and Virgo, especially opposite Pluto, you're going to damn well know that their insights are the ones that are the most important. The question is, are they? Very interesting astrological time we're in right now. It really does feel like the personal is definitely connected to the transpersonal in a way that maybe we haven't seen in a while. The personal and the transpersonal were linked together during the whole COVID stretch. right? It was all of a sudden Saturn in Aquarius, and we realized that whether we liked it or not, we were all in it together. They forced us to be all in it together, even if we weren't all in. And since then, we have been living in a transpersonal, personal dynamic. Everything has become just a manifestation of those two poles. So when we go through things now on a, what I would call, again, for lack of a better term, a collective level, there's the personal experience. The two have become sort of linked, interchangeable in a way that they've never been before, which is, one could say is a byproduct of the Aquarian age. And I would agree with that. Anyway, so go easy on yourself if you can. If you can't, with Mars, work it out. Like, work it out. And if you haven't worked out for a while, realize that you haven't worked out for a while and you don't have as much stamina or strength, or you're dealing with imperfections here. So I think it's a very interesting time, but not easy at all. It's not easy at all. And then we're right on the precipice of these nodes flipping. And it's really interesting. I've been looking at properties, and so I've been watching the MLS for the last, 2 months, really. And at Zero Taurus, all of a sudden, all these listings just went from being on the market for 2 months, 3 months, 5 months to pending, contingent, pending, contingent. It was like all of a sudden, all these properties started to get bought. Really weird. And it's, here we go. It's a true node at Zero Taurus. And, are we looking at kind of another land grab here, like a mini land grab? Or is this another kind of invasion of BlackRock at the local level? All of a sudden, we're in, right? It just happened really quickly and coinciding with the true node in Taurus. And we're about to flip. We're about to go into this nodal shift, and you will notice that nodal shift. You're probably noticing it already. People are way less patient, way less engaged in hearing the other side or the other point of view. It's just starting to heat up, folks. So take care of yourself, but don't be too hard on yourself if you're not further along or you're not as healthy as you'd like to be. And this dance that we're doing with the transpersonal is going to continue to manifest itself. And in some ways, it's very liberating. And in other ways, it's like you look around and you say, well, if it's all a lie and it's all an illusion, then, and all these people are here to just do nothing but cock block our relationship with reality, then why am I even here? And that may be a good starting point for asking some very important questions. Why are you here? And at that point, how do you derive value from your life? And that is an individual Q&A that I think everybody should be having and should have been having for a while now. All right, let's talk about our star of the day. A very interesting person, and one that some of you, today was just a gold mine. I could have gone in any direction. Bill Cosby, Richard Simmons, like there was a bunch of people today that merited attention. But today's star of the day is the Chilean poet, Pablo Neruda. And Neruda is, I believe he was a Nobel Prize winner for his poetry. I was at Songs of the Night or something like that. I remember when I was in college, and Neruda was not kind of as much in the mix in the 80s as he was in the 90s. And then all of a sudden, it was like Rumi, Rilke, and Neruda. Like that, those were the poets of the 90s. And they all shared kind of a mellifluous and sort of romantic, quasi-spiritual quality. And for Neruda, I was always struck, even though, of course, we're dealing with translations because he's writing in Spanish, but I was always struck with the feeling of Neruda. And, somebody who dabbled in poetry in my youth and studied it, college as an English major, I was really in awe of the guy's command of the language and how he was able to translate feelings, imagery, symbolism into words. And I had never looked at his chart before, and now I know why. Neptune, Mars, Moon, he's got that balsamic moon. So there's always an underlying sadness with Neruda as well. There's this kind of romantic longing in Neruda. One of the things I've talked about with the sign of Cancer is that as a sign, it's very soulful. Right? There's soul in Cancer, and clearly there's plenty of soul in Neruda's poetry. And Neptune, Mars coming right in and trining his ascendant, right? Like uber creative. And that the longing of the balsamic moon and being able to kind of language how he's feeling, and all these really tight conjunctions, super tight. Kazemi. And then over here, almost as equally as tight. The one kind of arbiter of the whole thing is the moon. And, it's balsamic, right? It is totally balsamic. And in Cancer, it is painfully balsamic. The letting go of the moon in Cancer is, it's really almost soul crushing in some ways. But I can see here in the fifth house, right? The ability to create language that is beautiful and poetic. It's all very fifth housey. And again, most of it kind of flowing right into that ascendant, at least Mars and Neptune. But the weird part about Neruda is that he is also a hardcore communist, which is not uncommon for people that live in South America. The South Americans were dosed heavily on communist theory. Some of it had to do with the fact that a lot of them were from Europe. Some of them were kind of on the flee from fascism in Europe, right? Like, let's get out of Europe and let's go to South America. Some of them are already in South America. Some of this, to me, has to do with a relationship with the strong man, and Neruda loved Castro. Neruda loved Stalin, right? Like, so it's really weird, and he's got Jupiter in Aries, which again is, kind of endemic of somebody who has a large relationship or big relationship with very authoritarian. Like, Aries can be very authoritarian, especially when it comes to the military. So he's got this weird kind of fixation around being like a hardcore communist. But then over here, he's a perfect example of what I was talking about. Like, when you read his poetry and the love poems and, the true note in the seventh house, right, which is all about the longing for the partner, you don't really give a shit about Neruda's politics. But then when you drill down, you're like, well, this guy supported fucking psychopaths, right? I mean, he's a clear example of what I've been talking about today in this whole kind of, personal and transpersonal moral crusade. Like, if you knew that he was a huge supporter of Stalin and a huge supporter of Lenin or a supporter of Castro, would you stop reading his poetry? Right? Like, all of a sudden, would you just and it's really hard to do. It's really hard to step back. It's kind of like, oh, this is like some of the best wine I've ever tasted. This is incredible. And then you find out that the guy that poured you the wine pissed in it. Like, it was still great wine, but now I'm finding out you pissed in the wine. Can I enjoy this? I mean, I know it's extreme, but he's kind of what I'm talking about. Like his politics sucked. He supported tyrants, and yet what came through his art and his poetry is anything but somebody who would do something like that in some ways. And it's a very odd kind of characteristic, but one that I think is, clearly topical for what we're talking about. And even Saturn in Aquarius, which again, I think Saturn in Aquarius is kind of totalitarian. And it's the secret relationship that he has. I mean, we saw it. Just go back to 2020 when Saturn went into Aquarius. Hello. Did you not get the totalitarian nature of Saturn in Aquarius? Yeah. Anyway, Pablo Neruda, and again, even Jupiter here, squaring off against all the, the deep, soulful, romantic feeling content that the man created, right? It's squaring off against that. And who knows, maybe that dynamic and that dynamic tension was the thing that fueled part of his art. So there was another person today that I was thinking about, and I don't often do the little bonus star of the day, but I couldn't help but notice how this person got thrust into the public eye, and just kind of out of nowhere, right? And their decision making, in a lot of ways, has become something that's been very much on the public stage, and it's Kristen Sinema. Today is Kristen Sinema's birthday, and she has Sun in the 10th house. And how many times have we seen Kristen Sinema have like the tie-breaking vote on something? With that Sun Mercury conjunction, it's going to be, and even Venus here, like she's going to be the person that's going to tilt it, because now she's an independent, right? She's, oh yeah, I'm no longer a Democrat or a Republican. And she's a fucking oddball too. You remember the first time you saw her walk up there with like knee-high boots and a skirt and fucking cowboy hat? I mean, she's in a backpack. Like she's really, Kristen Sinema's nutty. She's nutty. And she has Uranus in the first house. Again, kind of a nutty watermark. Not bad, right? But nutty. And the moon in Aquarius and square. She's just nutty. And there's your Mars in Virgo. She's having her Mars return. But again, somebody who just like pops up and now is in the limelight and becomes a 10th house person. And I thought to myself, this is a really exposition of somebody who just came out of nowhere. And there's your Sun in the 10th house, and how her decision making. And by the way, she's going to make a shit ton of money. By the time Kristen Sinema is done with being, didn't she replace John McCain? Right. By the time she's done, she's going to be rich. She's going to be rich, bitch. There you go. Star of the day, or stars of the day. All right. Come on over. 15 minutes. I think we'll get into this sound of freedom thing a bit more, I'm thinking, unless something really pops and we go in a different direction. But I think we might get into that a bit more. 15 minutes of flame. If you don't know about it, it's right here. You can join live. I also stream over on Rumble live. If you don't want to go to the site, that's fine. Right there, 15 minutes of flame, 9:11 to 10:41 a.m. here in the Central Time Zone in the great state of Texas. Now, during these times, sometimes you may need something to boost your health, fortify your cells, maybe take the edge off reality just a little bit. And our friends at True Hem Science are your one-stop shop for all of that. So all you got to do, if you're interested in really great CBD, go on over here and check out everything that they have. oils, edibles, while you're water soluble pets. Look, I'm just saying the edibles are worth the price. They're worth the price. If you live in a state where you can't go to a shop and said shop has chewables for your psychoactivation, this is your one-stop shop right here. Okay, because there are places here in Texas we don't have access to medical marijuana. We don't have access to recreational cannabis, right? So in the wake of all that, or in the void of those options, CBD and CBGA have really developed, and Chris has become kind of a master alchemist of the CBGA stuff. So whether it's the moon dust or the sleep gummies, they're great resources. And the CBD in general for health purposes is a great ally in our quest to stay in the game and to figure out why you're here, right? If you're going to figure out why you're here and what your purpose is now, and in Virgo, Mars and Virgo, there is an active dialogue and inquiry around all of that. So you may as well stay healthy. And just type in 15MINS. That's 15MINS. If you spend $100 more, you get some free product. All right. Thanks for being here. Have yourself a great day. If you're in the midst of your day, I hope it's meaningful and rewarding. Don't be too hard on yourself. No matter where you are on the wheel, do your best not to be too hard on yourself, but also don't dodge what you need to look at and cop to, admit, and gently commit to making it better. All right. Thanks. Take care. Bye for now.